I will call this Tigard City Council and Local Contract Review Board meeting to order. City Recorder Krieger, please call roll.
Councillor Singh.
Here.
Councillor Wolf.
Here.
Council President Hu.
Here.
Excuse me. Mayor Liu.
Here.
Youth Councillor Vogel.
Here.
And Councillor Shaw is absent. Excused, I should say.
If everyone will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Council or city teammates, any non-agenda items this evening?
Good evening, Mayor and councilors. We don't have any non-agenda items, but I would like to, just for the community, as our teammates' sake, just recognize two changes that we're recommending to the agenda for this evening. First is the removal of consent item 5B, which is the library HVAC project. We have some things that we have to work through on the response process to our to the bids that we received on that one, and we'll be coming back as we have that resolved. And then the second one is item number 8, which is in relation to our racial equity action plan and the equity declaration that we're asking you to consider tonight. We have some final revisions and enhancements to the document that talk about our community's history that we think are important for the final document of the plan, and so we're recommending that you discuss it tonight, and then as we make those final revisions, we'll come back in the very near future with the final document for adoption. And just for clarity, we're asking you to still consider the declaration as well this evening. So those are the two changes since we published the agenda. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. We will move on to public comments. If you'd like to call and give us public comment over the phone, please call now to get in the queue. The phone number is 503-966-4101. Anyone wishing to comment who hasn't signed up at the back of the room, please do so. And we will start with follow-up to previous public comment. There was no previous public comment. I apologize, I was trying to find the written public comment that was submitted. We did receive one yesterday. City Recorder Krieger, do you have that information? Oh. Off the top of your head?
I don't have it in front of me. It was a.
I found it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It is from Anna Murphy, and it is concern about lifting the open fire restriction in the current daytime camping ban. Understands the desire to be compassionate, but can't neglect the danger in allowing it. And they supplied a table showing homeless-related fires according to the Portland Fire and Rescue in 2022. Asked that moving people into shelters be the priority rather than focus on incrementally decreasing difficulties for campers. Okay. We will move on to in-person public comment. The first person we have signed up is Caleb Peterson. And if you would come up to the front, please. There's a button to turn on the microphone. It'll turn green, and you have 2 minutes. Welcome.
Is it possible I could have 5 minutes? I've been putting a lot of work into this, and I would greatly appreciate if I could have a little more time to speak on this.
Yeah, we could do 5 minutes.
Thank you. What we are doing is working. The way we end homelessness. Washington County takes a housing first approach to addressing homelessness, which essentially means someone gets a case manager, and the very first thing they do with that case manager is identify and move into housing. This is an evidence-based practice with greater housing retention rates than any other model out there. The problem is that there aren't enough housing caseworkers. It's hard work, there is a lot of vicarious trauma, and it doesn't pay enough. Because of this, the wait lists are very long to get into housing. I put people on this wait list all of the time, and I have put people on this list a year ago that are still waiting. And that's essentially what we're talking about here, waiting. People have to wait. The last time I was here with everyone, I think that we had hoped that tonight we would be talking about a lot more than just heat. One of the people that was here last time has since passed away, and I really want to emphasize the vulnerability of this population. Heat is as essential to life as water. Without it, people will die. You could not imagine what the winters look like, but without a proper way for people to keep themselves warm, they will die. Propane and gas canisters are an important tool for people to keep themselves warm, but not everyone has access to them. Some people have nothing, and a small campfire is the only way they can keep themselves warm and cook their food. I don't know the last time any of you saw a food box, but they're mostly canned goods, dried rice, and perishables. You need to be able to cook your food to eat. And lastly, I really want to encourage y'all to take some time to really understand the enforcement process of time, place, manner. There is a plan to bring forth a storage unit so people can keep their belongings somewhere during the day, but there is no official start date or plan of operation for this. But they have started posting people's camps for sweeps as of yesterday. They are planning to sweep every camp in Tigard at the end of the month, within a month, within a month. We need to take a thoughtful approach to this, a coordinated approach. The alternative resources, the alternative solutions need to be available before the enforcement process begins in order to have a successful and responsible transition into this ordinance. I know that this is an issue everyone is putting a lot of attention on, and I appreciate it, and I hope this can be an ongoing conversation between everyone because these issues take a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next individual is Eric Atenza. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Close enough. Atienza.
Atienza. Okay, thank you. Welcome. The microphone is still on, so you're good to go. And to be fair, we will also give you 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. One of the difficult aspects of being unhoused and unsheltered within Tigard and just overall Washington County is enduring the long periods of waiting to receive contact and help from housing case managers like myself and the organizations that we represent. Currently, the wait times for people in the Community Connects Hub can be up to an average of 6 months, if not almost an entire year. On top of that, because Housing Case Management Services, or HCMS, provides long-term care and advocacy, our current caseload limit caps at only 20 people per case manager out of the hundreds of people who are waiting for services at a future point. Considering my own experiences and that of my colleagues, even while people may actively receive services leading to housing, it takes time to process rental assistance vouchers, housing searches, background checks, and ensure overall access to other forms of social services. All of this occurs while many of our participants and future participants remain in places that are typically not meant for human habitation during this transitional period in their lives. As we approach colder seasons in just a few months, I am deeply anxious and concerned for the well-being and safety of the people that my colleagues and I serve in our program and within this community. Many of the people waiting and receiving services will need access to sources of heat to help sustain themselves and their families in the winter times as we provide case management and outreach. I plead with this council to assist us in making our work just a bit easier by allowing some form of sustainable heating sources to the unhoused members of Tigard's community. If the goal is to reduce houselessness, in the city of Tigard, I strongly believe that this is one of the few things that this council can approve to help realize this goal. I find it absolutely ridiculous that retaining current warming and cooking fire prohibitions is even an option as a resolve to this issue with the TPM ordinance. I don't believe that this city needs to wait another 3 months to review the idea of whether or not people need heat to survive the cold when they live outside. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wold, are there any phone callers in the queue or any requests to comment by video this evening?
Mayor, there are no callers in the queue and no requests for video comment.
Okay, thank you so much. We will turn now to City Manager Reimer for his administrative report.
Sorry, Mayor, I just closed my document, so give me 1 second.
It's like me not getting the thing
Yeah,
up. I
no.
guess technologically we're not doing well today.
I appreciate listening to the members of our community that were just speaking.
Mm.
All right, so good evening again, Mayor, councilors, members of the community, and my teammates that are here. It's been a while since I've given an update because we've had other things that have taken this time that are important for this community. So if you'll indulge me, I have a few more because there's a lot of things happening in this organization, as you know. First is our Tyler project. As the council know, you've approved bringing on some additional resources to help us move forward this council's goal. So Clarence Clark has started with us as the project director, working with many people in this organization, getting to understand the project, understand where we're at, understanding our teammates that are involved. So just a welcome to him, and glad to hear that we're continuing that moving forward. We will have an update for you next month on the progress that we're making on Tyler. A huge thanks. A lot of our library teammates are here, so that's awesome. As well as Mike Lueck, our CERT, and many others for the cooling center last week. As you know, we had some extreme temperatures, and we averaged about 10 people per day at the cooling center. So just another one of those great services that we provide to those in need during those days of extreme heat. We had a great concert in the park last week. Once again, with the heat, the team did a good job of moving things around so we could take advantage of as much shade as possible. And we had about 150 people in attendance, so on a warmer summer evening. You may have seen driving around our community, one of our TV vans is now wrapped with information explaining what we're doing with that vehicle. So Brian's here. Thanks to Brian and the team for just continuing finding ways of educating and making our community aware of the different things that are happening day in and day out that our community may not be aware when they see our vehicles driving around, but just another good way of the team looking at sharing information with our community. Speaking of our library, this is the last week of the summer reading program. I don't have any numbers on how many people are involved yet, but our community has until August 31st turn in their reading logs and then claim their free books and enter to win different prizes that we'll have. And as we know in the past, this has been a big hit, so we'll see who turns it in. We've had a lot of summer events happening as well at the library, without getting all the details, from puzzles to youth drumming ensembles, and a teen improv workshop taught by a local artist happened. Chief is on, I see. Thanks to Chief for attending the governor's signing of some significant public safety bills, especially those focused on our basic law enforcement academy. So appreciate Chief for being there, and I'll give you a highlight of a few others in my update this week as well. Tonight the PD also hosted our Popsicles and Police at Orchard Park. I have not heard how many people attended, but that was tonight in the series of events that we're having with them. On Saturday from 9 to 11, we have 25 girls signed up to attend the I Can Do This safety class led by one of our officers. So once again, another great community event and service as we engage our community in all different ways. And last but not least, as you know, the PD open house is coming up on September 30th. So we'll keep bringing that up. Chance for our community, our teammates, and others to come and learn everything and see everything that the PD has to offer, as well as learn more about our ballot measure next year and the need for new facilities. So with that, thanks again for indulging me, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or anything on the administrative report? No? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda for the Tigard City Council and Local Contract Review Board. The consent agenda is used for routine items, including minutes and approval of contracts or intergovernmental agreements. Information on each item is available on the city's website in the packet for this meeting. Items may be enacted in one motion without separate discussion. Council members may request an item be removed by motion for discussion and separate action. Mayor Loop, that's me, I will let you know that item number 5B, as discussed earlier, the Tigard Public Library HVAC upgrade contract has been pulled from the agenda due to a contested bid. And we have been made aware that Council President Hu has indicated he will move to remove the consent agenda 5A for separate discussion and action.
Yes, Mayor, please. I would like to move to remove item 5A, which is the Tiger Enterprise Zone local requirements for separate discussion.
Okay. I don't know that we've ever done this formally before, and I think, should we ask for a second and a vote? No, all right, excellent. Okay, so that is moved. So the updated consent agenda includes the contract for PMP preventative maintenance crack sealing. Is there any discussion or a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda as modified.
And a second?
I second.
The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. The motion is adopted by unanimous vote of the council present. And we will move on to the item that was pulled, the Tigard Enterprise Zone 4th and 5th year optional abatement. Come on up, Mr. Purdy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Did you see me stutter on my seat? I wasn't sure if you needed me up here or not, but I'm happy to be here. I'm Lloyd Purdy. I'm the city's Economic Development Manager. I'm also the Enterprise Zone Manager, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this agenda item. And with that in mind, I should probably give you all a real brief orientation about what the Enterprise Zone is and what it does for our community.
Yes, please.
Okay. The City of Tigard created the Tigard Enterprise Zone in 2014. It is at its core, at its simplest form, a 3-year property tax abatement on new capital investment, new equipment, new buildings even, when a manufacturer increases their employment by 10% and meets other state and local requirements. That's the program at its most simple level. I mentioned manufacturers. There are other types of companies that can participate. Headquarters type buildings were home to Consumer Cellular. They have in the past participated in the Tigard Enterprise Zone. And then there's a second option for the Tigard Enterprise Zone. It's a 4th and 5th year extension of that tax abatement. So a firm can get their 3 standard years of property taxes abated, and if they continue to meet employment requirements and other local conditions, they can carry that abatement into a 4th and 5th year. Over the past 9 years now, we've had about 8 or 9 firms participate. I say 8 or 9 because early in the history of the Tigard Enterprise Zone, the city of Lake Oswego asked us to expand the zone into their city. So we're one of the few enterprise zones that is in actually 2 different counties and 2 different cities, and they have a firm in Lake Oswego that is in the enterprise zone. So it's been used by mostly manufacturers, though I mentioned Consumer Cellular. There's another company, Reese Security. They're a headquarters type company here. Everybody else is pretty much a manufacturer. I think companies like Biamp or Agilix or Yecuris, which is a science tech company. So that's the history, as brief as I could make it, for the Tigard Enterprise Zone, technically called the Tigard Lake Oswego Enterprise Zone. This year, in the last state legislative year, the state of Oregon authorized a bill to extend the Enterprise Zone program, because this is done through state enabling legislation, for another 10 years. That was great. That allows localities to continue to choose to offer enterprise zones to firms. They also added in some extra requirements to the zone, and that prompted us to consider a change to our local conditions. The state of Oregon, now state law, says that any school district in an enterprise zone must now assess a 15 to 30% cost recovery fee during the 4th and 5th year of an enterprise zone tax abatement. So a firm that has met their 3-year standard abatement and is going to a 4th and 5th year moving forward, not the firms that are already doing that, but moving forward, the school district would have to bill, assess, or invoice those firms a 15 to 30% cost recovery of the amount of taxes abated. The guidance I received from the state was that ideally these agreements would be in place by September 24th, or any firm that's being considered for the enterprise zone wouldn't be eligible because the zone wouldn't be meeting its function. So my recommendation or my proposal for this is to take the action of removing the need for a 4th and 5th year cost recovery fee from the school district, and from, in fact, any district that is giving up tax revenue, including the city of Tigard, Washington County, the sheriff's office, all the taxing authorities. If we remove the 4th and 5th year, they would not be giving up tax abatement. The school district wouldn't have to develop a process for billing firms and recovering that fee, and we don't then have to develop a separate memorandum of understanding or agreement with the school district about some type of negotiated 15 to 30% cost recovery fee. So we do have the option of removing this local condition or this local benefit from the zone, and means we don't then have to add these extra steps in. The cost of that is, of course, a firm would not then be eligible to continue that abatement for those 4th and 5th years. We don't currently have any firms in the pipeline right now, so I don't expect that would be a loss. Any firm that comes in new, we would explain that we follow the standard abatement period. So I gave you a history of the enterprise zone and a more recent update about the state of Oregon's new zone requirements. And again, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I really appreciate that additional context. I don't know how familiar our new counselors are with the enterprise zone process. And I also want to thank the state legislature for giving us the option of whether or not to participate in those additional years, to leave it up to the jurisdiction on what's right for them. Are there any additional questions? Okay. Are you looking for a formal motion or just general guidance?
Yeah, good question. As a zone administrator, when the council authorized the zone back in 2014, they gave the zone administrator authority to make changes like this. So we don't need anything formal unless anybody says otherwise.
Okay. Is there any concern over removing the optional 4th and 5th year? No?
Nope.
Okay. Seeing that, do you feel as though you have what you need?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you,
council.
Mr. Purdy.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is an end of legislative session update, and we have Assistant City Manager Tritch to introduce this item. And we also have House District 26 Representative Neuron and District 25 Representative Bowman here with us today.
Good evening, Mayor, councilors, community, and our special guests. I am your Assistant City Manager for Investment and Infrastructure, Emily Tritch. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce some of the folks that represent us and do such great work for us in Salem. We're joined this evening by one of our newer representatives, Ben Bowman from District 25, Representative Neuron from House District 26, and Senator Aaron Woods, also new this term, unfortunately can't join us this evening for a personal emergency, but has done also tremendous work on behalf of the people of this community. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our representatives to speak about the session this year. Come on up.
You even have your own nameplates. Yes. I mean, I just smile. There we go.
We did not have these in TTSD, so we're gonna have to have them kick it up a little bit.
You have to send a note to Dr. Steve.
We're very fancy here. We're very excited to welcome you. So I actually think in the 4.5 years I've been on council, I don't know that we've ever truly had a legislative update from our representatives. So we can't thank you enough for being here to let us know everything that you accomplished and worked so hard for.
Well, I will just start by saying a huge thank you to Emily and Steve from the city, and to you, Mayor Loop, for being very present. We had Tigard Kitchen Cabinet meetings throughout the session where we invited district leaders, city leaders, Chamber of Commerce leaders, and Emily in particular was helpful. We'll talk about Hall Boulevard in a moment, but was just the responsiveness from the city was incredibly useful as we were navigating. So I want to say thank you for that. Should we jump in?
Sure.
Okay. So we've color-coded our slides. Blue is me, yellow is Representative Neron. I will kick off. You know, we were talking beforehand, we all campaign for these roles that we're in, and for the state legislature, much like I assume the city council, you build your agenda based on what you're hearing from voters and what you campaigned on. And these were the issues going into this legislative session that were the top priorities for us. Affordable housing, huge issue across this state. We heard it loud and clear in the city of Tigard, and I think the city of Tigard has a statewide reputation of being a leader on this front. Schools, a consistent issue in the state legislature. Addiction and mental health, a really severe challenge that our state is navigating right now. Healthcare and the cost of healthcare and the accessibility of healthcare services. Childcare, an increasingly expensive thing for our parents of young children. Community safety, particularly for folks in the Portland metro area, but also consistently across the state. And of course, in economic development, having Oregon be a place where businesses can succeed. That's kind of when we were going into the session, that's what we were focusing on.
Hello, Courtney Neron. I'm glad to be here with you all. It's really good to see you, Mayor Loeb, and council members, and to be here in partnership with Ben, Representative Bowman. It's an honor to serve Tigard together and to come here today to tell you all about what we've accomplished. And we can't cover all of it, but we will cover the highlights, as Ben mentioned a few, Representative Bowman mentioned a few of our highlights. And so some of our significant investments that we made in the legislature is essentially the purse strings as well as the policy making. Some of our significant investments in the areas that Representative Bowman mentioned are something that we're both really proud of having worked hard on, and that is the stable school funding at $10.2 billion state school fund, which I know so many of you care a lot about and we've had conversations about throughout the years. And in addition to the stable state school fund, we're celebrating an additional $144 million in literacy investments, really addressing a known issue, wanting to make sure we're strategic in tackling teacher training, high dosage tutoring, curriculum, making sure that our students and our educators are prepared for the best possible outcomes. We're also supporting our educator workforce with an additional $25 million that will help us make sure we're giving training, apprenticeship, mentorship, and conversations ongoing about how we support our educator workforce. So those are topic areas that Representative Bowman and I, as education advocates, have worked very hard to achieve. In addition, we heard loud and clear that we need to be working aggressively towards solutions in housing and homelessness, and we've invested nearly $2 billion to build homes and stabilize Oregonians at risk of homelessness. We've invested $153 million to stabilize our mobile crisis response funding and coordination, which we'll hear about in a little bit. And in addition, $172 million to help families with a cost of living crisis to reduce child poverty. These are our most vulnerable families, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment as well. We're investing $4 billion to fund our law enforcement, as we heard about just a moment ago, investing in community safety, and fully funding the Oregon Department of Emergency Management. And finally, on this slide, we're highlighting the $260 million to secure Oregon as a global leader in the semiconductor industry. This will create good paying jobs and boost our economy for generations to come. And some of our priority bills on the next slide that passed, we're celebrating a pause on tolling in this region, wanting to make sure that ODOT is really held accountable to legislation that currently exists. And our governor has implemented the pause through executive order, although we did have a bill introduced that was a catalyst for that conversation really being taken seriously. We want our communities, our local communities, to be heard at the table, and we want legislative leadership to have that oversight and create additional accountability for the Oregon Department of Transportation, making sure that they study alternatives and are comprehensive in their process. We're also celebrating both our advocates of the universal school meals, additional $17 million as we get Oregon closer to a universal school meals state. Many states are moving that direction. We'll keep advocating on behalf of students, knowing that it's very difficult for a student to learn while they're hungry. And our schools play a huge role in the nutrition for our children. We're celebrating protections for renters. In House Bill 3042, we passed this bill after studying Woodspring as essentially a case study of flaws in our system and how we can best prepare for stabilizing renters when rent rises to market rate suddenly. So we've added protections and ideally stabilized significant housing that's publicly supported across our entire state. The Toxic Free Kids Act has also passed, which will ban toxins from children's products, as well as a ban on toxins in cosmetics and the cosmetics testing on animals, which is now banned in the state. And then we were preventing irresponsible breeding and promoting humane treatment of dogs and cats. It was a good year for our pets and animals in the state. We've passed a lot of legislation that really addresses humane treatment. Cybersecurity has been a topic increasing in our cities, our counties, our state government, and we've improved cybersecurity in House Bill 2490. House Bill 2717 expanded outdoor preschools, and House Bill 2719 increases support for domestic violence survivors. I worked in partnership with Clackamas Women's Services to make sure Oregon statutes align with federal, and we've removed barriers for funding. We're also strengthening our public meeting laws in House Bill 2805, and another one back to the education. With COVID shone a light on so many of our challenges, and one of those is ventilation in our schools. So we've created more pathways for ventilation projects. This creates jobs. It also makes sure that we're addressing education infrastructure, as well as improving attendance, frankly. And then House Bill 3037 improves data collection for outdoor school programs. So those are a few that I focused on this past session, and take it away.
My computer has stopped working completely, so I'm going to borrow from you. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick hit on some of the priority bills that I was really proud to work on. Representative Neron mentioned the early literacy investments, which I think will be a game changer in this state. They're going to, I always try to caution people, upstream investments often take a long time to for us to see the benefits, but really making sure that all of our educators are trained and aware of the best practices in teaching early literacy is going to be a big deal in this state. And another literacy investment that I'm incredibly excited about is the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. I think you all are familiar with this program. Basically, Dolly Parton has chosen to use her celebrity and wealth in the coolest way possible, which is subsidizing the publishing of children's books and making them readily available to kids. So basically, with this new state investment, every kid in this state is going to be eligible to receive one free book per month from the time they're born till the time they turn 5 years old in the mail. So a very cool and exciting program that I think is going to make a difference for kids and families. I'm going to save the Hall Boulevard stuff. We have a separate slide. We have a separate slide on nurse staffing. The final bill I want to talk about that gets me excited is about cybersecurity on state assets. So it says bans TikTok on state devices, which is true, but it does more than that. We also are giving the power to the state's chief information officer, which is our chief IT person in the state, to determine which platform or which applications are safe to be on state devices and which aren't. This is an emerging issue at governments at all level, which I'm sure you're aware of. The privacy of Oregonians' data is at risk increasingly, and there are a number of companies and applications who may have access to information by the presence of their application on a phone or a state device. We are ending that practice for the statute lists out like 6 or 8 specific applications and then says, okay, Chief Information Officer, consistently review this list and figure out what else we need to protect against. So there's a little sampling, and I'm going to hand it back to Representative Neron.
Yeah, thank you. And now we're going to kind of launch into some of the initial slide that Representative Bowman went through, our topics that we focused on in the legislature. We have a slide on each to highlight some of the policies under each category. And before I do, I want to just highlight that the conversation is often where do we draw that line in policymaking? As Representative Bowman just mentioned, that flexibility that we're able to give an entity, the Chief Information Officer, certain power and control over something that is an expertise. Where do we make sure that there's local control? As we heard the previous speaker talk about the enterprise zones, and that there is an ability to make a decision without extensive bureaucracy. So we're trying to really hit that mark of making sure that we are creating the best structures possible for strong economy, vibrant communities. And one of those topic areas that we've addressed is housing, and it will be continue to be a conversation about where do we draw the line between local control and the state policy making. So Representative Bowman and I have been really tuned into and thank you, City of Tigard, for the conversations and the partnership and making sure that we're informed and representing your views of local control in terms of housing. So launching into housing policies that did pass, we passed the Housing Supply and Stability Budget in 3 different bills with the $2 billion investment that I mentioned. And then we also invested $200 million in making sure that our shelters for Oregonians living on the street, that we're responding to the emergency homelessness funding that's needed, preventing homelessness and ramping up affordable housing production across the state. One focus area that Representative Bowman and I have been really dialed into is the current inventory of affordable housing. So House Bill 3042 is one that I mentioned previously in terms of Wood Springs. We learned a lot about our structures. House Bill 3042 specifically extends the right of first refusal period for expiring properties to have a greater likelihood of being passed on to owners who will keep them affordable, as the City of Tigard was able to do. And so this would extend that time amount. We also in this bill ensure notice to tenants and future tenants of expiring affordability protections. So that's not something that was previously in place. And for units transitioning to market rate, there's now a 3-year safe harbor period with a review process for proposed rent increases of 5% or more. So that really stabilizes rent for individuals that previously would not have had any buffer of time before their subsidized housing would be suddenly market rate. And we also passed a very interesting bill. I'll be very interested in having further conversations with you all about how this is implemented in the City of Tigard. Commercial to rental conversions in House Bill 2984 allows local governments to convert commercial buildings to residential housing. And then rent stabilization has been a huge conversation in our legislature. With Senate Bill 611, we limit the annual rent increases to lesser of either 10% or 7% plus the consumer price index. And I will name that this is only for construction that is older than 15 years. And so any of the newer apartment complexes are still potentially subject to exponentially rising rents, which we're hearing from our constituents that their rents are rising faster than their paychecks. And we're both very involved in education, but I'll move on to our strong focus of strong schools. Representative Bowman being on the Higher Education Committee and myself being the chair of the Education Committee for K-12. We focused on our educator workforce, and with Senate Bill 283, we are setting up apprenticeship mentorships. We're supporting our special education teachers. We are talking about minimum salaries and statewide salary schedules. We have, for the first time, ensured just cause job protections for a critical part of our workforce. Our classified staff did not previously have just cause job protections across the state, and now they do. And then ongoing, before we move on to the next one, do you want to talk a little bit about how you're going to be supporting educator preparation?
Yes, I was excited to be appointed by Speaker Dan Rayfield to the Educator Preparation Council that's focusing on this early literacy question. So there's this debate, do we put educator prep stuff in the early literacy bill, or is that a separate thing? There's arguments both ways. I was kind of hoping we were going to include it, but the governor's office, and major kudos to Governor Kotek for stepping up and creating this. Basically, all the public higher ed, private higher ed, anyone who's training teachers, we're going to put our heads together and try to make sure all the curriculum for training teachers is aligned to the same best practices that we're teaching our educators with in the bill that we previously mentioned, if that makes sense. So I'm very excited about this. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, and as an educator myself, I'm really thrilled that we did have such a strong focus and we're able to deliver on bills that really will support our education workforce. Also, one thing that we heard from our students quite regularly was the need for career planning and personal finance. And so we have added that as well as a graduation requirement. Also, the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact allows for teachers to move within the compact from state to state. If they're already in the state of Oregon and they have a teacher license, they will now be able to teach in the state without jumping through extra hoops. And then we've focused on our students with disabilities in Senate Bill 819 and ensuring that they have access to equal education and reducing the practice of abbreviated days. And our superintendent in the Tigard-Tualatin School District was integral in that conversation and making sure that we move forward successfully from that, with that bill. In terms of addiction treatment and behavioral health, turn it over to Representative Bowman.
So again, a huge topic of concern in the state right now is our addiction and mental health crisis. I think there's no doubt that this is a crisis. It's a very visible crisis, particularly in downtown Portland right now. I am not of the mind that we have solved this problem with the suite of investments and policies I'm going to describe, but I do think we've made some important steps forward. So the first bill mentioned here, there's not a lot of bills that you get to vote on where you're pretty confident you're going to save people's lives. This is one of those bills. 988 is the suicide response crisis line. States are responsible for figuring out how to fund that program on their own, although there is national infrastructure and national support. Our congressional delegation actually is very supportive of this. But we figured out how to create a new revenue source with bipartisan support to ensure that we can continue to offer this service and that the phone is always going to be picked up when someone with suicidal ideation calls. So that's a very big deal, and a major shout out to Representative Tana Sanchez, who is a big leader on this issue. The opioid harm reduction package, there's a lot of different facets of addressing the addiction crisis we're facing in the state. One facet of that is trying to make a person's addiction less deadly and less harmful to that person. So basically what this package does is it increases access to harm reduction techniques, things like naloxone, which many of you know is a life-saving drug if someone is experiencing an overdose that can literally save their lives. So making those sort of things more available. We increased the penalty on possession of fentanyl. This was, you're all reading the headlines. Fentanyl is a disaster in this state. It's readily available. It's incredibly deadly. And so the legislature, again, on a bipartisan basis, I think every single bill on this slide is bipartisan. We needed to step up the penalties for fentanyl. Path to recovery, sometimes this is referred to as the Hope and Recovery Bill. There were some technical problems with Measure 110. Regardless of how we feel about Measure 110 as a policy solution, there were some technical problems about, like for example, the terms of the board members were all the same term, so everyone was slated to be done at the same time. So we staggered the terms, we increased oversight capacity of OHA and the link between OHA and this council, so there was clear accountability about who was in charge and how it was supposed to be managed and how the staffing supported the committee would work. So that's what that bill did, important changes that had to get done to improve implementation. And then finally, a pretty significant investment package, which builds on an even more significant package from the previous biennium. The previous biennium broke all the records in Oregon. It was $1 billion per year. This includes some more targeted investments on top of that. That's basically about expanding access to the behavioral health system. It can be very tricky to try to get an entry point into that system. We don't have enough beds. We don't have enough workforce right now. We'll talk about workforce on the next slide. But this is trying to make it a little bit easier to get people engaged in the system. So the next slide is about healthcare more broadly. House Bill 2002, reproductive health and access to care. I'm sure you heard or read headlines about this bill. It was a controversial one for our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But ultimately, they did return back to the legislature. This was one of those bills that was causing controversy, and the bill passed. And essentially, it's a bit complicated, like all this legislation is, but it codifies the rights that people in this country had under Roe v. Wade in state law. And it affirms the right of doctors to be able to offer gender-affirming care to people who need it. That's life-saving care, in my opinion. I'm glad that the bill passed, and that's House Bill 2002. The bill that I am most surprised in a pleasant way that it got through in the way that it is this next bill. We call it nurse staffing levels. It's a broader bill than that. But this was a bill that a lot of folks in the healthcare world thought was going to blow up this session, because you had hospital and health systems on one side and nurses and other healthcare worker unions on the other side. As you know, during the pandemic, our healthcare workforce was like pushed to the brink, and people are leaving the industry in droves, and we had to do something about it. Striking that balance was really challenging, but major kudos goes out to both of those advocacy groups, because they came together and they came up with a policy that everybody could support. And I think it's going to make a big deal in making it easier for our nurses and other healthcare professionals to stay in the field where we desperately need them right now. Lowering costs, and in this particular bill, it's really about transparency for pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. I don't know if you've heard about these. Different people have different descriptions of them. They're essentially the middleman between pharmacies and pharmaceutical companies and insurance and patients. There's many who believe that PBMs are driving up the cost of pharmaceuticals. So one of the bills that passed was specifically about transparency and trying to figure out what the relationship looks like and what the costs of drugs at each level looks like. Expanding access to life-saving HIV treatment, PEP. Representative Graber, the former representative for this district, deserves a major shout out for her leadership on that bill. And then the Universal Health Plan Governance Board. So Measure 111 passed at the ballot box. This was about saying healthcare is a human right for all Oregonians. Great thing to say, hard thing to implement with policy. There was a previous work group that was supposed to design what would a universal health plan look like in this state. This board has the much harder job of saying, okay, how would we implement that? How much is it going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? How are we going to ensure everyone has coverage? How's it going to work on the provider side? So they have a big job in front of them, and we passed the proposal, which was the ask of the advocates to take this conversation to the next step. And for childcare, we're going to go to Representative Neron.
Yeah, and this is one that I could talk about all day, but I do know that we are at a certain amount of time crunch, so I'm going to go quickly through a topic I care so much about. This is an area that has a lot of bipartisan support, again, and one that we really initiated a lot of change in this sector with House Bill 3073 a few sessions ago that revamped our employment-related daycare and then also set up the Department of Early Learning and Care. I was just on a meeting with them earlier today, and it sounds like it's going very well. I'm thrilled to say that we are creating better systems and streamlining governance of our child care sector. And a few of the policies within this space that we have passed this session include Senate Bill 599, which helps our home-based providers who are renters, making sure that they are able to operate their care business out of their home. Then also the child care facilities is often a barrier in our cities and our counties. So with House Bill 3005, we have created Child Care Infrastructure Fund to build, repair, and expand quality programs, and that is for homes, centers, schools, and community organizations. So that really infuses a lot of those needed dollars to get some facilities off the ground. We're looking at child care zoning, making sure that there is child care near our employment areas, and that we're strategic as we invest in a sector like the semiconductor sector, that we're also investing in the child care that's needed to make sure that our parents can return to work or stay in work at work and maintain employment. And then we have the Oregon's Kids Credit, which I mentioned previously, is an investment in our most vulnerable families. This is a $1,000 per child tax credit annually for qualifying families, and these are our most vulnerable families. Ideally, this will lift some of our families that are struggling to make rent, feed their families, and so $1,000 per child annually will now go to qualifying families. I'm thrilled to be celebrating the Family Preservation Project at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, which is also in House District 26. We fought for that funding and were able to achieve that funding. That keeps incarcerated parents connected to their children. And then also the court-appointed special advocates. I'm really so invested in making sure that Oregon lives up to its statutory obligation to ensure that any child in foster care has a CASA, helping them through and navigate our legal system. And then outdoor preschool licensure is one that I care a lot about, making sure we're creating capacity in our preschool programming and are giving equitable opportunities for kids to experience preschool outdoors. And turning it over to Rep. Bowman.
Okay, quick hits on community safety. The public defender crisis we are all aware of. In fact, there's just another story about the federal judge about Washington County and the lack of access to public defenders. So we shifted the governance of public defenders in this state and allocated significant new dollars to this crisis. Gun violence prevention, ghost guns. This is another example of the regulatory framework taking a bit to catch up with what is happening in the field, but basically we are prohibiting the sale, manufacturing, and importing of ghost guns. These are untraceable, no ID numbers on the guns. They should not exist in this state, so we have prohibited them. Expanding legal protections for victims of bias crimes, expanding the definition of intoxicants in DUII. And one thing not on this slide that I actually think is super important, we allocated $66 million new dollars to DPSST, which in my conversations with Chief McAlpine, she will tell you that even if you can hire someone in your police department, there's still a backlog to get them trained through the academy. So we allocated some new dollars that's going to hopefully do a bit of a pressure release to that crisis that I'm really proud of. Economic development.
All right. So highlighting within our economic development work, the Oregon's CHIPS Act, again, was Senate Bill 4, and we're really setting up Oregon that way with that money to be competitive across the nation in attracting and retaining quality jobs. So looking forward to seeing those jobs come to Oregon. And we also have an economic incentives modernization package, as we heard the previous speaker talking about our enterprise zone program. So modernizing that meant that we were aligning Oregon's tax incentive structure with Oregon's values and bolstering our economy by creating a research and development tax credit, extending the enterprise zone program, and updating the strategic investment program. And then one thing that we've worked on in partnership with our senator is broadband expansion as well. So House Bill 3201 sets up financial assistance programs that support broadband access and affordability so that we can aligns our goals with federal requirements. Then on the next slide, we are highlighting the pause on tolling. I mentioned it briefly, so I'll go quickly through this slide. With the House Bill 3614, we were going to be setting up a task force, and then instead we now have a legislative committee that will be set up to oversee. One thing that's important to us is that there is community voice on that committee, that we have a representative from the Clackamas County area, which would be the first to see tolling, really in the room, making sure that our voice is heard and that our views are represented. So again, your partnership as a city has been really helpful in understanding what you hope to see ODOT deliver on and what our Tigard constituents are saying about this topic. So Representative Bowman and I will continue to lean in and make sure that we are tracking and holding ODOT accountable to the best of our ability, making sure that the environmental impacts, diversion is considered, economic impact and concerns, as well as community feedback and safety are really centered in the work that comes out of that pause. And on to Hall.
Hall Boulevard,
for
my favorite topic to talk about. So the slide here says I introduced House Bill 2756. That is true, but on Hall Boulevard in particular, I mean, we actually work together on basically a lot of things, almost everything. Senator Woods, Representative Neron, and I made very clear from the very beginning of session that Hall Boulevard was a priority for us. Representative Neron grew up in this community. She's probably driven on Hall Boulevard more than I have. But it's a problem for all the reasons that all of you know. I don't need to go through that. It's not safe. It is, in fact, people have died on Hall Boulevard in our community. It's just not acceptable for a state asset to be in the condition that it's in. which, by the way, ODOT agrees with. The question is, how do you fix it? So what we ended up getting, we had a very ambitious bill that said, give us $50 million and let us invent a new Hall Boulevard that would actually meet the needs of our community. We didn't get that. What we did get was $3 million allocated, which I hope in concert with federal dollars that it sounds like we are in a good place to receive. We're gonna make it easier to walk along and across Hall Boulevard in multiple different places across the stretch all the way from Durham until the edge of the city boundary. So I'm very excited about that. And knowing that a full 50 million or even 30 million for Hall was gonna be a tall ask, we had this other bill, which again, I wanna emphasize, like, huge shout out to Emily and to Will Anderson, my former chief of staff, who some of you got to work with. This bill would not have happened without them, and I think it puts Tigard in a really good spot to advocate for Hall Boulevard moving forward. So essentially, the bill is called, or the committee is called the Jurisdictional Transfer Advisory Committee. I've already met with the ODOT director yesterday about this. I met with the governor's appointment person a couple weeks ago. I met with the governor's transportation policy advisor. Everyone's aware of this, and it is on their priority list. They're gonna get a committee appointed by the end of September. I think there's several folks from Tigard who have already applied to be part of that committee. But the idea is basically for all these orphan highways, all these underfunded and undermaintained state roads across the state, how do we figure out how to get those to the proper ownership? Tigard has already raised their hand, which separates us from most local jurisdictions, saying we will take on the added financial responsibility, but we need you to get us to this level. This committee is going to evaluate all the orphan highways where a local jurisdiction has said they'll take it on, and ODOT has agreed with them about the cost it would take to make that transfer happen. So that'll be appointed by the end of next month. The first set of recommendations will be, I believe, before the next long session, essentially. So the hope is this committee is going to come with a prioritized list, present it to the legislature, and in 2025, when we do this big transportation package, we'll be able to say, hey, include funding for orphan highways in this transportation package. We got to sort out this orphan highway situation. So that's Hall Boulevard. Woodspring, another happy subject.
So exciting. I've touched on a little bit about this before, and I just want to celebrate with you all how exciting it is that there was a solution achieved with Woodspring. As we learned from it, we were also kind of chasing the issue, but it informed us, and so we are celebrating along with you all that the Woodsprings apartments were purchased successfully in partnership, but by Washington County, and so I'm sure you probably want to say a little bit more about that too.
Just that I just think we all owe a debt of gratitude to people like Lois Keck, who was just a retired senior citizen living in an apartment where she thought she was going to end her life, and the world had other plans for her, and so she stepped up and helped create this incredible advocacy organization of senior citizens who just wanted to be able to age in place, and it doesn't happen without them organizing and doing it. So I just think that they're incredible people.
Yeah, and they showed up. They showed up to our testimonies. It's a really good example of how citizen voice matters, and it changed and shaped the policy that we ultimately were able to pass. They helped us build that momentum so that other people don't have to go through what they experienced. It's incredibly moving, and we're so grateful for all of the partnership along the way.
Totally.
And as Representative Bowman mentioned, one of the things that I think we also want to celebrate here is the fact that we both grew up in the areas that we represent. And so having driven by Woodsprings my whole life and driven down Hall Boulevard, and now Representative Bowman, who went to Tualatin High School and I went to Tigard High School, we like to celebrate the fact, I think we're maybe the only pair of people that grew up in the district. We should check on that.
We should check on that, but
I should not make that claim. But I feel really proud of the fact that we get to serve together and that we know our communities so well, and it's a huge honor.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
really fun. And we sometimes like to go kayaking between our districts.
Blisters on my thumb still from the last kayaking.
We kayaked Cook Park to the King City dock and back to connect our districts, so that was really fun. And then just in wrapping up the preview of the legislative session, I'll just summarize this by just saying Representative Bowman and I are really committed to continuing to work on issues that you all care about, and represented on this slide, we're going to continue to work on education, strong schools, stable funding, making sure that we have safe communities, making sure that we have housing for everyone, and establishing really equitable policies across the state and throughout the different sectors. I have a constituent coffee coming up. On the next slide is the information from This Saturday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. I will be at the Wilsonville Public Library. Just to clarify, my district is Wilsonville, Sherwood, King City, and Bull Mountains River Terrace, as well as some of the unincorporated Bull Mountain areas. And so that's the Tigard portion of the district of mine. That's a triangle out to Newburgh and Charbonneau. And your constituent coffee as well.
If you don't get enough from Courtney on Saturday, on Sunday, you can come to my constituent coffee at Symposium, where it's basically my office. And during the week, I just do meetings constantly there. But yeah, constituent coffees are an awesome opportunity for constituents, local electeds to just chat. It tends to be more informal than a town hall. So everyone is welcome to stop by and say hi or weigh in on something not going great.
And our last slide is how to stay in touch. And I can speak for myself, but I know you've expressed the same, is that we really appreciate our connection with you all and the conversations that we've had throughout the session and how you've helped keep us informed and how we've celebrated and advocated together. So for anyone that would like to reach out to us, here's our email, phone number, and website information, and Instagram and Facebook.
Cool. Thank you. Sorry we went a little over. A lot happened in the legislature.
It's hard to summarize it all. Hopefully we've shed a little bit more light onto some of the work we've been doing on your behalf.
I mean, it was a long session.
In more ways
We have dad jokes here. I just, thank you so much. And I just want to reiterate again, I think our government works better when all levels of our elected officials work together. And I'm so proud of that in Tigard, from the city level to the state level to the federal level. We're all working together, and that has benefited the Tigard community in good policies and policies that reflect what the Tigard community wants, and in real dollars coming directly into our city and improving our city. And that makes such a huge difference. And it wouldn't, it's a joy to work with both of you. I know not everybody works with them on the level that I do, but I really just also want to shout out that y'all took some hard votes for us and you listened to us. And sometimes there's a balance between whether the elected official represents the level of governments to its constituents or represents the constituents to the government that they represent. And you both really listened to us, and it made a huge difference. And we really appreciate that we have advocates in our corner who understand and take the time to understand how the city functions. So with that, I do want to open it up to questions if anyone has questions. That was a lot of information. You answered most of my questions throughout the presentation. Council President Hu?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Representative Bowman and Nera, and Senator Wood for representing Tigard so well. So I have one question for Rep. Bowman and one for Rep. Nera. For Rep. Bowman, since you talk about Measure 110 and a potential fix in your town halls, so I'm just wondering, the first detox center was opened just last week in Portland, and that's after almost 3 years of a passage of Measure 110. And one thing that Chief McAlpine mentioned is that sometimes it's difficult to, when they pick up someone who may be a drug addict, sending them to jail is not the best solution or long-term solution. And we are having difficulties because we really lack drug treatment center around here. So I'm just wondering if you know why it took almost 3 years for the first detox center to open, and do you know it's because we're trying to build foundation for them, or are there more coming, or they're coming faster, or are there a way to make sure that Measure 110 money will come into our community and build those detox centers faster?
That's a great question. So what I do know, I can follow up and get better details, but what I do know is they are tracking how the Measure 110 dollars are being spent. And so you can see on a dashboard how many new beds are being created, where they are in the state, so we can get that dashboard out. In terms of why it took so long, part of what we fixed in that Hope and Recovery bill was to address some of those implementation challenges. There was like a quote, this was under previous administration, where it's basically like the executive branch said that they couldn't be involved here, because the way that the ballot measure was written was it was this sort of separate independent board that was supposed to make all these decisions, but it took a while to get the board all appointed. OHA wasn't clear on their relationship with this board or how much staff support they were supposed to be including. or recommending. So I think a lot of those technical aspects have been addressed in the fix bill. I think we should also just acknowledge that like this isn't the only state problem where it's taken too long for the money to get out the door. I think this is, we passed a procurement bill, a modernization bill, nonprofit modernization bill that brings together some of the nonprofits who receive a lot of the state dollars to implement the services, and so they will be coming back to us with a set of recommendations to speed up the procurement process. Because we also, in addition to the like technical aspects of Measure 110, there's the state procurement layered on top, which out of safety for the state to avoid, inappropriate use of state dollars, it takes a long time. There's DOJ review, there's the highest level of the agency reviewed. It takes a long time for it to get done. So that's a separate thing that's going to take a little bit longer to get implemented. But let me follow up on the detox center question, unless you've got anything to add to that.
I would just add that there's general agreement, what you've highlighted, that it took too long and that we need to make sure that we are getting dollars out the door faster. There's an urgency to this issue and a few others, and we all agree that one of the things we need to fix is the speed and the flow of the dollars. So thanks for highlighting that.
Oh, thank you. And for you, Rep. Nara, and I remember you taking me on a tour of Wilsonville of the mixed-use housing. That's just, it's a wide variety of use, and it's very walkable, and there's Wilsonville bus right there. So that just remind me a lot of what I would like to see at River Terrace, your district, and River Terrace 2.0. But as you know, one of the issue right now is we have no public transit there. So as we are building out more and more housing in River Terrace, do you have any suggestions on how we can be better? I don't want to say TriMet is a problem, but how could we be a better partner with TriMet so we can, bring more public transit there? I appreciate you highlighting that, one of the legislative focus is affordable housing. But to me, affordable housing and public transit, they all seem to be there seems to be decoupling so far. I haven't seen anybody talking about them as two really, integrated solution for affordable housing, because cars are very expensive to own and operate. So if you are living in River Terrace with those affordable housing, but you don't have public transit, it's not really affordable if you have to pay a lot for a car. So do you have any idea on how the city can be better partner with TriMet, or maybe go to the extreme length like Wilsonville to have their own bus system? I mean, I don't know if you have answer for that, but
Yeah, I would love to talk about this at length. I think in summary, there's a moratorium on bus systems like what Wilsonville has, unfortunately, but it is working quite well in the Wilsonville area. We have free busing within the city of Wilsonville. So my neighborhood was built with 4 bus stops within a block of my house, for example. I think if we're building neighborhoods with bus stops in them, there's more of an acceptance right from the get-go that you are near transportation options. And I'm hearing from TriMet that they need ridership before they're providing busing. Well, the #1 conversation that I had with people in the Bull Mountain area is walkability, access to TriMet, making sure that they can get around. And we do have a variety of incomes on Bull Mountain. There are low-income apartments that need access to a bus, but have to walk a mile or more to get to Pacific Highway to the nearest bus. And that's unacceptable. I believe, like you have highlighted, that we need to be building affordable housing, low-income housing with transportation options in partnership. And with the new housing that's going in right next to Mountainside High School, we worked to make sure that the developer there understood that that needed to be, set up with transportation in mind. I would like to see TriMet serving that at the outset. And so I'd be happy to have conversations with you and with TriMet. I'm facilitating a conversation between TriMet and Wilsonville right now, and happy to do the same for Tigard and TriMet, because there are conversations that need to be elevated to make sure that these service areas that are paying the same as individuals in high-serviced areas, that these individuals who are paying the same into the TriMet region have service within their homes. And this is everybody from these, the low-income housing, affordable housing that we're talking about. Also, though, Lyft rides, and I'm not sure that if I remember, is it a Dial-A-Ride? There are individuals who have mobility challenges who cannot exit their neighborhood in the Bull Mountain area to get to the nearest bus stop,
Right.
to be, to take the bus somewhere, or who don't have a Dial-A-Ride service, a ridership. Accessibility because they live outside of, and I'm not remembering the distance, but I think it's like a mile or a mile and 3/4 or something. They have to be a certain distance to a TriMet bus stop already in order to have access. There are a lot of challenges here. I absolutely have heard this from our constituents as well, and would be happy to continue conversations to make sure TriMet takes us seriously. We need TriMet and bus systems out at the edge of urban growth as it grows, so that we build in kind of that acceptance from the get-go that we are connected as a region to our transportation system.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Wolf?
Thank you both. So I will be very brief, but just an excellent in-depth conversation or presentation. Know you both are champions and authentic in so many of the pieces of legislations that's passed. So with multiple hats on, thank you both very, very much. So I think my biggest just plea, and I know that it isn't necessary, but as Representative Bowman talked about Measure 110, how do we move forward? We had public comment tonight around time, place, and manner as we continue these very serious conversations around heat and how do we really assist those that are still unhoused. I'm very proud of the leadership that Tigard has given on affordable housing options, the work that's been invested for temporary housing as well. But just that continued advocacy into 2024 or 2025, how we're making progress, but we have a long way to go to really support those that are living in unstable conditions. So I think that's just my advocacy, along with just a huge thank you for really all that you both are doing. So thank you.
Thank you for highlighting that. And one topic we didn't touch on at all is environmental issues and climate action, but you've named heat. So focusing on that, we absolutely have had conversations about how to support the unhoused. And I'll just highlight and then turn it over to Representative Bowman that we're in conversations with Just Compassion and the incredible work that they're doing to serve the city of Tigard, and we'll continue to look at how potentially the state can support the work that's being done locally to make sure that people are housed.
I don't think I have much to add other than, $2 billion almost was spent by that is a gigantic amount of money, unprecedented. Here's the problem: how are we going to spend those dollars? So I think that's part of our job over the next 2, 4, 6 years is making sure those dollars, to the point about Measure 110, it should not take forever for those dollars to get out the door. I just heard that the Good Neighbor Center is in a financially challenging situation. How do we ensure that state resources are, we definitely cannot afford for a shelter to close in our local area. So I don't want to say the easy part is allocating the funding, because that's a hard thing to do too, but the hard part is also going to be making sure that all those resources are spent strategically and in ways that are actually serving the needs of the people who we're trying to serve. So we're all going to have to watchdog that together and advocate for Tigard moving forward.
Youth Councilor Vogel, did you have any questions or comments?
I think my questions were answered. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. We appreciate the work that you do. The next item on our agenda is an ordinance granting a 6-month extension of the franchise agreement with Portland General Electric. I will open the public hearing, and anyone wishing to testify by phone or video or in person, there is a sign-up sheet that is being picked up for this issue, and if you'd like to call now, please do so to get in the queue. It's 503-966-4101, and we will welcome Public Works Director Rager to give the city teammate report.
Good evening, Mayor Lube and council. Tonight, I want to talk with you about the franchise agreement for Portland General Electric. It is up for renewal, and in fact, the agreement has expired. which sounds ominous, but as your staff lead for franchise agreements, I just want to assure you that all is well between the city and PGE. For a little background, PGE's local government affairs representative, KJ Lewis, she and I began talking about this in mid-May, and those discussions very positive, yet we both agreed that we likely were not going to get a new agreement in place by the time the existing one expired. So when we started looking at our respective calendars, and we each had vacations planned, etc. So we had to talk about an extension, or how do we bridge between the existing and a new one. So after some research within the organization here, it was determined that since franchise agreements are adopted by ordinance, that an extension should also be adopted by ordinance. So that's why I'm with you here tonight. PGE has been a very valued and reliable partner to the city, and they've exhibited exemplary performance under the existing franchise agreement. They've been prompt in their payments of franchise fees to the city, and beyond that, they've really taken the time to form a really solid relationship with us. They meet with us annually. They share with us what they've accomplished in their programs, as well as giving us a heads up as to what's coming for them and how that might affect us. Further, they are always offering partnership around how the city manages its energy costs. With all of that said, I have no hesitation in recommending that you adopt the ordinance tonight that would grant that 6-month extension. That would bring the new expiration date to December 23rd of this year. I'll answer questions if you have them.
Council President Hu?
This might be a question for our city attorney. Is it necessary to say that this extension is retroactively extended from June 24th, or is that not necessary?
So it would be automatic, because if it's an extension of the ordinance itself, but certainly in the motion that doesn't help to, or doesn't hurt to add it.
I feel like you have additional follow-up question.
Was it just say in motion to retroactive, or do we need specific language to be added?
We're not to the motion part yet.
Okay.
Yep, we're still technically in a public hearing, so
Okay.
the questions need to be specific to the ordinance.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I don't have a question right anymore, thank you.
Okay. We will move on to public testimony. City Recorder Krager, let's see. No one has signed up to speak on this issue. Mr. Wold, is anyone wishing to comment by video or phone?
There are no callers in the queue, Mayor.
Okay, so there's no response to testimony, and I will close the public hearing. And now we can talk about it, including a motion. I think we could just move to approve the ordinance number. I don't know that there has to be any other specific language in the motion. So,
In that case, I move to approve ordinance number 23-06.
I'll second.
okay, the ordinance has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, City Recorder, please read the number and title of the ordinance.
Ordinance number 23-06, an ordinance granting the extension of the non-exclusive franchise with Portland General Electric Company, PGE, to operate an electric utility system in the city of Tigard, Oregon, including the right to place and operate this system in the public rights of way and declaring an emergency.
Okay. City Recorder Krager, can you please conduct a roll call vote, starting with Youth Councilor Vogel for an advisory vote?
Youth Councilor Vogel,
Yes.
Councilor Singh,
Yes.
Councilor Wolf,
Yes.
Council President Hu,
Yes.
Mayor Lube.
Yes. Ordinance number 23-06 is adopted by unanimous vote of the council present. Thank you, Mr. Rager.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda tonight is an adoption, which will actually be a discussion and not an adoption, on the Racial Equity Action Plan and Equity Commitment Declaration. City Manager Reimer and DEIB Manager Jun will give the staff report. Welcome.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll just kick this off as Kurt settles in there. As the council recalls, the last time you had a conversation with us publicly about this topic was in April of this year, where we discussed both the Racial Equity Action Plan that had been worked on for a number of years by teammates, as well as the Equity Commitment Declaration. And tonight we wanted to further that conversation. You already referenced postponing the adoption of the Racial Equity Action Plan. I want everyone to know that doesn't mean anything from a lack of support or anything. Like I said, it's just we need to finalize a few things. I also want to make one more comment before I turn it over is we view both these documents very much as living documents. And so we want to start with a point in time, but we know things change. We learn more, new ideas come our way. Teammates have ideas on how we can strengthen them. And so hopefully the council also embraces that we'll be asking you to adopt a document today. One of them and one in the future here, but both of them would be with the feeling that they're a living document. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt. Kurt?
All right. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and councilors. It's a pleasure to be here with you again. I do want to recognize that I'm accompanied here tonight with several members of our city's chartered DEI advisory team who represent all of the departments within the city. We have several others that are joining us online. Because this is a very special and significant moment for us as a city. And I want to just also, just as amusement, share with you that my wife has accompanied me here too to ensure that I do a good job and to keep to my allotted time of 10 minutes. So with that, I am very honored to be here with you to just provide you a program management update. I'm just circling back with a few items that was presented here to the council. As City Manager mentioned, the Equity Commitment Declaration was a draft at that point, and then also the Racial Equity Action Plan, and some new thoughts of initiatives that we would like to focus on. Tonight, just to just provide the proper context for this part of the agenda, this work of diversity, equity, inclusion for belonging, we have to always begin with the context of why, because we all have very different perspectives around this work. And so I do want to share that many of my colleagues here at the city recognize the clear moral imperative of this work, of just all peoples. And then also understanding how our operations and the city's operations, why this is clearly a business imperative for us as well. This is a necessity for any city to thrive, to flourish, and it's not just about risk management. And so with that, some of the strategic themes and foundations that we are continually working on is providing the clarity of why this work is important, providing a clear common language of what we mean by this work. It is to embrace the inherent value of every person. It is to also explain our city's commitment to our vision and values for all peoples, and providing a connection as to how this work is related to everyone's responsibilities. And then addressing the issue of culture and how we can foster a more inclusive environment, careers, community, as well as the challenge. Where do we go from here with DEIB? So with that, I would like to just share that this work of equity is all over our written commitment as a city. It's in our strategic vision that says Tigard will be an equitable community that is walkable, healthy, and accessible for everyone. It's written in our community promise of the 5 E's. It's listed as the first E, where we've stated that we will ensure just and fair inclusion where all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. So with that, I wanted to present a very vetted as well as collaborated equity commitment declaration that has been put forth and pulled together by the fine people of the DEI advisory team, as well as the leadership team. And so we've taken all of their feedback, input, and perspectives. And what I would like to present before you is our final draft of the Equity Commitment Declaration. And if you would allow me to just read this for us. Again, as it's stated in our community promise on equity, we will ensure just and fair inclusion where all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. And this commitment is just to expound that community promise. So the City of Tigard is dedicated to doing the right thing by ensuring dignity, respect, and inclusion for all. And our mission, vision, and community promise embrace equity as central to all we do. We aim to create a community where every person feels a sense of belonging, regardless of any individual identity. Our commitment to equity means that we work to eliminate the barriers that prevent people from accessing decision-making processes and addressing social and economic disparities. We recognize that championing equity entails a focused initiative to addressing systemic challenges that are tied to race and color, while fostering a culture of inclusivity within our workspace and the broader community. Therefore, we are resolute to continuously monitor and improve the racial diversity representation of our workforce, ensuring equitable access for all employees, and promoting diversity and inclusion in the greater community. We believe diversity and inclusion are essential components for creating a thriving city. Our mission is to ensure that everyone in our community is empowered with the necessary resources and opportunities they need to flourish. We hold firm that every person has inherent value and deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. We will continue to strive towards this promise and commitment every day. So with that, I would like to now share about the Racial Equity Action Plan. It has been the work of several colleagues long before I arrived here. Great many input and feedback put into the completion of that document. And this Racial Equity Action Plan needs to address the question of why lead with race. And I shared in my April presentation that much of the predictable and pervasive indicators is related to color and race. And I've also accompanied a executive summary research that has been extensively conducted with Washington County and the Coalition of Communities of Color on why lead with race. And they will share a very extensive and exhaustive list of data that shows in every industry there is, again, a pervasive and predictable indicator. And so this plan is not to accuse our city. It is to ensure that our city is equitable in our practices, procedures, programs, as well as finances. So there are three key strategies that are captured in this Racial Equity Action Plan. The first is to cultivate an inclusive culture. The second is to develop and utilize shared resources and tools. The third is bias towards action and continuous improvement. One point I'd like to just expound on, as well as found on page 6, with the use of this term, systemic racism. And I know that the term in itself is a very volatile term. It's a very offensive term. However, I just would like to share what we mean by systemic racism versus individual racism. When it's mentioned about systemic issues of race and color, we're saying that not one person is responsible for that, but there are structural and institutional policies or practices or programs or projects and procedures that are in place that that does not get to everyone. When we say individual racism, we're speaking of internalized or interpersonal biases or prejudices that one might have that is shown in either their microaggressions or micro-invalidations or just micro-insults that reflect their perceptions of certain groups of people or also on socioeconomic levels. The systemic racism and internalized or individual racism can be intended or unintended. And so we just want to ensure that we as a city in our operations, we are mindful of fostering an environment of inclusion as well as valuing one another. Several new initiatives and focus that are listed here for you is a strategic plan for equity, all things equity, since that's our vision and mission and community promise. Reviewing the structure and alignment of how proficiently this work can move forward up and down and side to side of this organization. Providing diversity education and training, supporting and equipping our organization on how to hold courageous conversations about race, developing and identifying key performance indicators for equity, also the development of a diverse workforce plan. In the near future, we will be presenting an equity mapping solutions project that is going to be delivered by the first of the year. And then a diversity conversations toolkit for managers. And one of the most important items that I have here in terms of the new initiatives is a equity toolkit that will standardize a way in which we can operationalize equities to ensure that there was some lens and practices of standardization that has been applied. We will, that will be a long-range goal of implementation, but something in which many of the other outlying cities have adopted and implemented in their practices. And then also an inclusive leadership performance compass and competencies for our management. So tonight, we'd like to propose the adoption for the Equity Commitment Declaration. Again, it is simply to just expound upon our vision and our community promise, and answering the question of why, to just, again, ensure and not to accuse our organization or our city, but to ensure that we are embracing the inherent value of every person that we serve. So with that, I would like to open it up for any comments, thoughts, questions.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Councilor Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, DIB Manager June. Really appreciate all the work that you've just put into this and the team here today. And yeah, I look forward to the Equity Mapping Solutions Project coming out and all the initiatives that you mentioned. So just want to thank you for this.
Thank you, Councilor.
Yeah, Councilor Wolf.
Yeah. So I would ditto Councilor Singh. Thank you so much, Manager June, for all your work. What I'm curious about is, you know, as I read the declaration and wholeheartedly support the work, I'm just curious, as you worked with your teams, hoping there's been some departments that have kind of stepped up as kind of those early leaders, early adopters. If you could give us some examples of what you've been able to kind of move forward for the city at this point.
Yes.
That'd be fantastic.
Yes,
Thank you.
we've had, well, several of the directors are represented here tonight. Director Halstead from the Public Library, Director Brian Rager from Public Works, Chief Kathy for the Police Department, Kenny from the Community Development. In fact, I was part of a Latinos in Government Association meeting last week, and to hear about the profound support and the work that Kenny has done in this work of equity has been a tremendous, a wonderful thing to hear from other colleagues that are now working in different local governments. Director Brian Rager has kindly invited me to his whole entire Public Works Department to do a presentation on diversity. Chief Kathy has invited me to their entire police department to conduct cross-cultural training. Again, I know that it's it was positive in that they have invited me back. So just really wanting to understand the audience, where they are in this journey of this work and this maturity continuum, and just meeting people where they are to bring them along, that this does not infringe on in unsafe places or territory, but how do we just meet in the middle of agreement and having the freedom to agree to disagree while yet embracing the inherent value of every person.
Council President Hu?
Thank you so much for the work, and I totally, like Councilor Wolf, I totally 100% behind the declaration. I just believe that it's not only the right thing, but it makes good business sense, even though the government doesn't run like a business. But you know, most of the most successful business in this country adopt similar policies. So you know, I'm being cynical. It's, you know, their bottom line is money. So if it's good for them, you know, there's something there, right? So speaking of doing the right thing, I don't necessarily disagree. The declaration, it says to do the right thing, but at the same time, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. I just think, like, you know, you say sky is blue. It's of course it's blue. So you can't say, you know, it's the right thing to say the sky is blue. So I don't know. I'm maybe I don't know. I just get hung up there a little bit. But can you explain why the reasoning behind saying it's the right thing, not the natural things or the moral things? So, yeah.
Yeah. So there are two things I'll share. One is I took those terms right out of our city's values, and one of the values is to do the right thing. And so I just want to be consistent with our city's written propositions for the communities. The second is you're absolutely right, Councilor, that this idea of doing the right thing, we would believe that the majority would be in agreement with that, but we also want to recognize that there are those that also hold differing views, and we do want to provide that safe space. But when we state that we're wanting to do the right thing, this is to just be consistent with what the city has already articulated in their vision and mission and values. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question, because I think I initially had the same, well, that reads a little, but I certainly understand wanting to maintain the same verbiage that we use in our values. And I hear that while it may be our right value and moral thing to do, that doesn't mean that the rest of the community feels that way. And I think it's important that we make that statement. Yeah.
And then also, I'd just like to remind everyone, as City Manager Steve mentioned, this is a living document, and as we mature and grow in our understanding of this work, I do see opportunities for revision and updates and edits. So I will take that as duly noted. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you for this important work that you're doing and helping to lead the city. You know, reading these words, I think, are fundamental to what I believe as a human being and what I've experienced as a human being. Just getting help along the way in the right ways to allow me to get to where I am, and just thinking just and fair inclusion where all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. Like, just sit with that. Think about what our community could look like if everybody reached their full potential. I mean, I want to live there. And so it feels like such a strong commitment and declaration that we stand there and we say, this is who we are. So thank you for putting our values in important writing to help create this declaration and bring it forward. So we will not be moving on the Racial Equity Action Plan. If there are no other questions, I would certainly entertain a motion to adopt the Equity Commitment Declaration.
I move to adopt the Equity Commitment Declaration.
Go ahead.
I second the motion.
Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. Youth Counselor Vogel, will you please provide an advisory vote?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted by unanimous vote of the council present. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is the Library Holds Locker Project presentation. And we have Library Circulation Manager Sear. How do I pronounce your last name? I don't want to butcher it.
Yes, Sear, you got it.
Sear, yes. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Mayor Lube and city councilors, members of the Tigard community, and fellow Tigard teammates. My name is Cheryl Sear. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the circulation manager at the Tigard Public Library. I'm here tonight to tell you about a wonderful opportunity for the Tigard Public Library of a pilot program to expand access of library services into the community. I'm honored to be here to talk about the Holds Locker project, and I want to thank you all for your time. It's a special night since this is my first time presenting here at council. To just share about myself briefly, I joined the Tigard Library last fall, moving here from Arizona. I've worked in a variety of libraries, including ones in the Army and Navy, as well as San Diego State University. I felt very welcomed by the City of Tigard leadership team, and I have to say I have been so impressed with our director, Halstead Bernard, who does a remarkable job of leading the library and moving us forward in our strategic plan while keeping people, both staff and community, front and center. And I am so proud to be a part of this team. Before we get to the Holds Lockers, let me tell you a little bit about the division that I manage, which is circulation. So we're the teammates in the library that greet you at the front desk. We create the new library cards, check items out, as well as shelve returned items and pull holds that people have requested. One of the objectives in the library's strategic plan is to expand access into the community, and that is what we plan to do with this project. So this partnership is between Tigard Public Library and Washington County Cooperative Library Services, who I'll also refer to as WCCLS. This project began when WCCLS was able to secure American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funding, to purchase these lockers for the West Slope Library as a test to see if there are ways to expand access into our shared communities. The lockers were not used to their full potential at West Slope, so WCCLS looked for another partner library for this project, and our library was chosen for several reasons. Key among them was our size. We are a busy library with hundreds of visitors each day, and we have the skilled staff that can manage the workload and analyze the data. So this is a 2-year pilot during which we will be offering the WCCLS cardholders the opportunity to reserve their hold items for pickup from the lockers in the lobby of the library. And we now open the lobby at 9 a.m. 5 days a week, and patrons will have additional time to pick up their items. Our lockers will work much like the current hold systems, wherein patrons can place hold on items through their online accounts, and then they'll be notified when their item is ready for pickup. The patron will come to the lockers, and like our current self-checkout machines, they will scan their card, enter their PIN, and then the associated locker door will open and the patron will collect their items. Over the next 2 years, the Tigard Library will collect data on the workloads and staffing requirements, best practices, and lessons learned, and we will share those with our WCCLS partners to help other libraries determine if the lockers are a feasible option for them. And we will be doing the same assessment at our library, reaching out to our community to see how they would like us to expand access, whether it's lockers like this that are located outside where they can be available for 24/7 access, or at an alternate location. Then once we've analyzed the data, we'll share it out and have recommendations on the way forward to expand access. So you will look for that in 2025. But in the interim, our plan will be to join you here again next summer to share our first year update on the project. And so I come to you tonight asking for your support to come and join us at the grand opening on Tuesday, October 3rd at 5 p.m. And after our lockers launch, please use the service and talk to others about it and help us spread the word to our community. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions other than excitement? Council President Hu?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Right now I'm using a lot of, I borrow a lot of books electronically on my app, so I'm not sure the physical checkout, I'm not too familiar with the physical checkout process. Would this locker allow you to take item out without a library card, or is library cards always required?
You will need a library card, so anybody
Okay.
with a WCCLS library card can place a hold, and you can pick it up at the lobby.
So if you forgot your library card, you have to come back and.
Well, you can come up to the desk, and we can help you get that number, and you can still check the item out if you did reserve it in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I can vouch they're very helpful when you forget things, like your PIN number or your card. Yeah. Any additional questions? Other than I'm excited to. I think I'm gonna get some kids' books. Spoiler alert. So thank you so much. We appreciate you updating us on this cool new project, and I'm so glad out of WCCLS that we were chosen. I think that's pretty awesome. That says a lot about our library. So thank you. All right. The next item on the agenda is the time, place, and manner ordinance update. And we have City Attorney Rahala and Strategic Initiatives Program Manager Azell to lead the discussion. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. So tonight's presentation is a continuation of the time, place, manner conversation that we began in May. So in May, the ordinance for time, place, manner was passed, and it included a requirement that we come back and speak to Council starting in August and then every 6 months thereafter. So this is our first of those planned updates on the implementation of time, place, manner. Tonight we'll be going over some legal updates, how implementation has been going, some considerations for possible ordinance amendments, and then have time for any questions. And next slide, please. I'll turn it over to City Attorney Rahala to talk through some legal updates.
Thank you. And could I have the next slide, please? All right, so there's a couple legal updates. Things happening, not anything to be gleaned from them. So to start with, the City of Portland has received a challenge to their ordinance. It's not unexpected. We know very little about it because it's pending litigation. The city is pretty tight-lipped about it, so just know that it's out there. The City of Grants Pass, so you probably heard in the news, the decision was made to not, or to affirm the lower court's ruling by a three-member panel of the Ninth Circuit. That was appealed to what's called an en banc opinion or hearing. So in that case, the entire court has the option to rehear the three-member panel's decision. The entire court declined, and so that left in place the three-member panel decision. That is the highest appeal at the Ninth Circuit. Actually, today, the City of Grants Pass filed an appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court. So they filed a request for, it's called a petition for certiorari, and the U.S. Supreme Court can decide to hear it or not hear it. They decided, you may recall, the Boise case also, there was a petition for cert filed. The court declined to hear that decision. That was a much different Supreme Court. And so the U.S. Supreme Court terms start in October. So sometime after October, later this year, early next year, this court will decide whether they want to accept that petition and hear this case. In the filing, the City of Grants Pass does note a conflict between the 8th and 11th circuits, and contrary to the Ninth Circuit decision, that is generally when the U.S. Supreme Court decides to intervene, as if there is a split in the circuits. So stay tuned for more to come on this from the national level. That would be a really big deal.
Can you just do like a super high level reminder of exactly what the City of Grants Pass ruling is?
Yeah, so the City of Grants Pass ruling, so it was a challenge to their case. Actually, so I'll read you the question. The question presented to the U.S. Supreme Court is, does the enforcement of generally applicable laws regulating camping on public property constitute cruel and unusual punishment prohibited by the Eighth Amendment? So the Grants Pass case, it basically mirrors Boise. There's a couple things that it extends. One of them is Boise was interpreted to largely apply just to criminal cases. So the citations in Grants Pass are civil. So that would be one distinction. The other thing about Grants Pass is that it really focused on protection from the elements. So the ordinance in Grants Pass said you can sleep on public property, but you can't have any structures. And so the decision in Grants Pass really said it's unconstitutional to say that you can sleep, but you can't protect yourself from the elements. And so this will be a time, place, manner, essentially, hearing focused on, are the Grants Pass regulations reasonable, or are they a violation of cruel and unusual punishment? So if the court decides to take this case, that'll have huge implications.
Thank you. I think we talk about it like everybody remembers all of the details, and just a refresher is helpful.
Right, absolutely. So then the City of Bend, so they had again, this was in the news recently, they had a pretty large camp on the north side of town, and they posted notice that they were going to do a sweep and clean that camp. Several of the campers requested, it says injunction, it was actually a temporary restraining order, a TRO, against the city. Basically, a TRO preserves status quo. And so by filing it, the campers were essentially saying the city is barred from taking further action. So they first filed in circuit court, and the circuit court denied the request. They also appealed to federal court. The federal court agreed with the circuit court, and so the cleanup went ahead and was conducted. So a couple things to be gleaned from that. So a TRO is not heard on the merits, and so there is no likelihood of success that is considered. But the judge in that court case, the circuit court case, did say that she believed that the Bend case, or the Bend ordinance, was reasonable. So we have a data point as to what is reasonable, but it also wasn't heard on the merits. And so it has basically no precedential value, but it is a data point. So after the cleanup was conducted, the City of Bend did receive a tort notice, basically saying in the coming months, they gave 90 days, I think that was about 60 days ago, that they would be receiving a tort claim under the Oregon Tort Claims Act. So under the Tort Claims Act, first comes a notice, then comes a complaint. So anytime we're expecting a complaint in that case. So that would be heard by Deschutes County Circuit Court with appeals to the Oregon court system. So lots happening, no useful information yet, but there's a lot of things out there.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So moving forward into the implementation. Next slide, please. So just a refresher on the calendar. Like I stated earlier, Tigard adopted time, place, manner regulations May 22nd, and these went into effect on July 1st. However, during that period from late June through about mid-August, there was an intensive houseless outreach that was funded through the governor's executive order and led by the county. In an effort to not disturb that outreach effort, we decided not to enforce time, place, manner during that period. That way our outreach teams were better able to reach the folks that they were trying to connect with rather than moving folks as time, place, manner would require. Thank you to Mr. Peterson and his colleagues. They were absolutely instrumental in that effort. Over 40 individuals were identified who are either living outdoors or in their cars during that effort, and a third of those folks were able to be connected up with shelter or housing. Given that our average time of folks being houseless in this city is about 5 years, that is a huge amount of change that was able to take place in just 7 weeks. However, going into September, time, place, manner enforcement is beginning. There are 8 identified encampments at this time. They'll be posted over the next 7 weeks. Tigard's Police Department, and especially Officer Orth, are being very deliberate about that process. We have a schedule of how those encampments are being posted. It's been shared with the Just Compassion outreach team so that they're prepared to know how and when these folks will be affected, and we're doing 1 camp at a time per week so that there isn't a mass exodus for folks. So trying to be as compassionate and deliberate as possible while still upholding the time, place, manner ordinance. Next slide, please. As part of the implementation, we've done quite a bit of communication. We've created a city website that's available with information on rules, resources. It has the map. We've also created a brochure that's been distributed through city buildings, farmers market. There's been a stack delivered to Just Compassion, and our officers have all received the brochures, and those have been distributed. We've also done internal outreach to city teammates on the new rules, especially as time, place, manner does allow for camping on city property, letting all of our teammates know how that may affect them on a day-to-day basis. So far, we have not seen camping on city property. Next slide, please. Going along with implementation, we've also added services, not just for our houseless community, but for our entire community. That includes adding additional trash cans and porta potties on city property. We are also working towards a new daytime storage facility. This is to allow folks to be able to have a place to put their things during the day when camping is prohibited. We're modeling our facility on a similar one that's in Portland. That's been very successful over the years, and we've delivered a proposal to Just Compassion, and we're asking them to review it for does this make sense, and also what would be the cost that we could expect to incur running this type of facility, and then we would be contracting it out to a provider, probably Just Compassion, in order to run that facility. Next slide, please. Our next set of considerations around ordinance amendments does focus around fire, specifically fires used for warming and cooking. I know that came up earlier in our testimony, and this was also something that came up back in May, and we've received questions on it from you over the last month. So next slide, please. So our current state of our ordinance, fire of all kinds is prohibited due to the perceived danger. Neighboring jurisdictions have chosen to go in a variety of different paths. Hillsborough has chosen to allow small camp stoves and cooking devices, but does prohibit open flames. Beaverton, similar to our ordinance, prohibits all fire and gas heaters. Tualatin prohibits fire but does not address cooking stoves, so those are permitted. And Washington County similarly prohibits warming fires and does not address cooking stoves in their ordinance. Next slide, please. Some considerations. So we've reached out to TVFNR about number of fires that they've been experiencing or responding to that are caused by houseless encampments, as well as if they have advice for us on whether or not to prohibit. They've told us that they do not prohibit the use of warming or cooking fires unless they present a risk to people or property. They use the colorful term hostile fires to define those, and that they have not been tracking whether or not fires were created by houseless encampments, although they anecdotally don't believe that there's been a high number of fires caused in houseless encampments, and they are now beginning to track that information. We also know that fire, particularly in the summer months, like we saw last week with that horrible heat wave, can pose a significant public safety risk. Large propane tanks in particular can be dangerous. Those are the fires that we typically see in the news coming out of major cities such as Portland. And we know that our winters are cold, and existing outside of that heat can be dangerous to our unhoused community members. We also know community members camping outside have access to food that requires heating, either through our grocery stores, as well as a lot of the food boxes that are distributed include perishable foods, canned food, similar to Mr. Peterson's comments earlier this evening. And we also understand that if camping is allowed on city property, as it currently is, and fires are allowed as part of time, place, manner, there does become a nexus there, and that we would need to consider how we might want to craft any amendments that would protect the city from liability and potential fire damage. Next slide, please. So our question for you this evening is, knowing all of those considerations and then looking through these options, does council have guidance for us on how to craft perhaps an amendment to this ordinance, or should we leave it the same until our next review in 6 months? So a few options are to retain the current warming and cooking fire prohibition. Option 2 would be to do similar to some of our other jurisdictions, allowing small stoves and cooking devices to be used while still prohibiting open flame as well as large propane tanks. Or 3, allowing small open flame fires and cooking devices for warming and cooking, still prohibiting those large propane tanks, as we do believe that they pose the greatest risk. There are other options on the table as well. I'm sure there's other hybrids. And we added a couple extra slides at the end just to show some photos of what these options could look like. So next slide, and one more. So this is an example of what a 2-foot fire looks like. It's about this size on the floor. And then next slide, please. And these are examples of a 2-burner cooktop stove, a camping stove on the left, and then on the right would be a 1-burner, and you can see how the flame operates in the 1-burner stove. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions, comments, and look for your guidance.
Thank you. Councilor Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Kim. Just want to ask a question about if we've been communicating directly with those that are at encampments, if we've done any surveys or anything, just to hear from them.
We have not done any surveys with our unhoused individuals. One piece of feedback that we have received from our chart group is that our folks who are living unhoused have a lot of other concerns on their minds, and so they've asked that we kind of use our service providers as that nexus, and so that's why we appreciate so much when folks like Mr. Peterson come out, because they're really the voice of a lot of our community members.
Council President Hu?
Thank you, and thank you, Kim. So in your example number 2, would that be option 2 or option 3 or both? Because the second example you showed is a cooking stove, but it does have open flames, so I'm a little confused.
It does. I should clarify that open flames would be like a fire pit of some kind,
okay.
Not a propane or gas inside of a cooking stove. So those 2 options of the cooking stoves would be for both options 2 and 3. And then the option that I showed first, which now does seem out of order, of the open fire pit would be just for option number 3.
And in your opinion, if during 1 month, what those cooking device should not be used, or should be used, or I'm thinking about if we allow them, maybe not summertime, but so that's another option, I think.
There's definitely a consideration around seasonality. It's something
Right.
that we've considered. Less so with stoves because they would be used primarily for cooking and maybe less likely to...
For heat source.
But for heat sources or open flame, definitely more of a concern in the summer times.
Okay, and one
they,
more.
They all pose a
Yeah,
concern.
and one more question is, I remember when we were talking about allowing fireworks, and Councilor Shaw asked about city liability if we allowed them, and city attorney said that would not be a liability. But this will be different, right? Because if we specifically allow people to use any of those devices on city property, then we will be liable. That's different than other people selling fireworks and we don't regulate it. Is that?
So it's not a definite yes,
Okay.
but the likelihood of a nexus with liability is substantially increased. There's also just the risk to city property. We've already had our insurance carrier express concern about whether they would provide coverage at all in terms of if there was a fire started on city property that damaged city property. And we were openly sanctioning having fires here, that they would be concerned about that. So again, it's not a guarantee, but it is much more of a concern when we affirmatively say, come build your fires here.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask for clarification if there is a difference between like a camp stove and like a campfire? Was there any differentiation with the insurance carrier?
So we haven't reached that level of detail with them. Definitely, Kim and I have had a lot of conversations about how to define this, because we do think that there is a difference between a fire and a cooking device. And so we were toying with the idea earlier, is it something where the flame is contained inside the device as opposed to something exterior, or dimensions, or what does it look like where we can put parameters on it in a way that it's clearly defined, but also there's some protection to not just having an open flame that can easily be knocked over or otherwise.
I will just say I feel like after the conversation that you indicated with our insurance carrier that they might not cover, I think before we would give guidance, we would need to know if that differentiation would make sense, or if that would make the difference between them covering or not. I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable giving any sort of guidance without that information to protect our Councilor Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor. And that's a great segue to one of my concerns. I appreciate that was from Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, that a small fire is fine until it's not. I mean, and so for me, what would be really helpful, certainly the clarity on insurance, but not 6 months, Kim, but maybe even September, right? While temperature, what worries me is our seasons are changing. And so October can be very dry, very hot, very smoke-filled. So still trying to manage what is an open fire, how could that be contained, what are some sideboards to make that more of a safer option as we really head into colder evenings. And I don't mean any disrespect, because this is a really hard conversation, and it's easy for me to say what's appropriate when I head home. I really appreciated the comment about the food boxes, because I do have some experience with that. And as soon as you said that, yeah, they're canned goods, they're rice bags, they're all the things that make sustainable meals for someone, but require assistance. So I mean, I truly, I talked to Steve today, I'm literally trying to find, is there a cooking tool that does not have, a small propane, flame on it? So I appreciate that need. So I feel like I'm all over the map. So I'm interested in what can we do to support people with their food preparation. I'm really concerned about open fires. We're still in a hot, dry period. What are some sideboards that could help us understand the risks and options? So that's kind of where I am.
Yeah. I mean, it just comes to my mind, right? Like a hot plate that people would have in their dorm rooms, but then it's like, well, how do you get electricity there? Yes. Yeah. Council President who?
Also, Hillsborough, Tualatin, and the county, they don't address cooking stove, or they don't prohibit it because they don't allow camping on their government properties, right? So perhaps as a compromise, if the insurance carrier won't insure us anymore, I'm not saying I agree to this, but maybe thinking about allow cooking stove, but prohibit camping on city property. Maybe that's a fair exchange to get around the insurance issue. So I don't know. So maybe we can explore that, but
Or perhaps on city property, there's no open flames.
That sounds good, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Enforcement
I
might be
don't know.
confusing.
Yeah,
it might
I know.
be confusing for enforcement.
There's no good answer here.
So, yeah, but thank you for the update. I really appreciate it. And I concur with Councilor Wolf. We need to address this sooner than later, because winter will be here before we know it. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So it looks like we're looking for information to come back to us before we can make an educated decision. My other question is, I think one of the pressing issues that we talked about when we talked about time, place, manner was the issue of time. And then as winter is coming, right, like it's getting darker much sooner. I already miss you, son. And I noticed that addressing time wasn't in here at all. So was there consideration made? Because I think that was part of our request as an item to come back.
I apologize. That must have just slipped by, but we can definitely come back with more considerations on time. I will say, now that we have a better idea of what all of our neighboring jurisdictions have done, which we were not able to do in May because we were one of the first to pass our ordinance, that we do have the most liberal time, with the latest time in the morning and the earliest or the same time in the evening. So we are, I think, 14 hours, which is by far the most allowed camping time, other than Washington County, who's allowing 5 full days.
Thank you for that info.
So, Council, if I can just add one more piece to that. Another concept that we discussed is the Washington County model, where it's not set hours in a day, it's a set camping time period. And so Washington County is 5 days. The city of Bend is 24 hours. And so again, going back to that data point of a judge who didn't hear the case on the merits said that 24 hours was reasonable. And so is that something that council is interested in considering as well? We heard a lot of feedback last time about people who do shift work, and how is it reasonable to expect people to not camp during the day. And so as we look at implementation and revising this ordinance as we go forward, is that something that council wants us to consider as well? Again, I think it's premature to say that there's any real reliance on if that is more reasonable than others, but we do know that that is being challenged in Portland, and we do know that 24 hours, again, one judge in Bend said that that was okay. So throwing that out there as well.
Can you remind me, because I don't remember off the top of my head, what Portland's is in comparison?
Kim, do you?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can get back to you, though.
Okay. I just think that would be an interesting, another data point of that one's being challenged, but Bend is reasonable. Any additional questions or comments? Do you think you have enough confused questions to come back?
I think so. Thank you.
Yes, and I would agree. I think sooner rather than later. So as we continue to work with our community, that there aren't any surprises, would be great. Thank you for your work on this, and thank you for your advocacy and sharing information with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. The Tigard, there are no non-agenda items, and so the Tigard City Council is entering into executive session to discuss the performance review of a public official under ORS 192-6602I. All discussions are confidential, and those present may disclose nothing from the session. Representatives of the news media are allowed to attend executive sessions as provided by ORS 192.6604, but must not disclose any information discussed. No executive session may be held for the purpose of taking any final action or making any final decision. Executive sessions are closed from the public, and we will adjourn after the executive session. So thank you so much. Good night, Tigard.